towards the southwest. That's the weather.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines, Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean? And let's just remind ourselves, this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together with Ross Atkins. Outside Source on BBC World News.
This is BBC World News. I'm Tanya Beckett. On today's Global, China and America go head-to-head over TikTok. China condemns the US government's decision to order all its agencies to delete the social media app because of security concerns.
We firmly oppose the US's wrong approach of overstretching the concept of national security, abusing national power, and unreasonably suppressing the companies of other countries.
Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is in Northern Ireland seeking support for his deal with the EU on trading arrangements post-Brexit. And later in Global, Israel tightens security in the West Bank city of Jericho after a wave of attacks. It comes after a Palestinian gunman carried out several drive-by shootings in the city and 2 settlers were shot dead near Nablus. And starstruck, the French chef who's been stripped of one of his Michelin awards. Welcome once again. China has hit out at the United States in a controversy over the video sharing app TikTok. It's after the White House ordered government agencies to wipe TikTok off federal devices within 30 days. The move follows legislation passed by Congress in December, and since then, the European Commission and Canada have put similar bans in place. But the US could take things a step further. The House Foreign Affairs Committee is due to vote on a bill to give President Biden new powers to ban the Chinese-linked social media app, which is used by more than 100 million Americans. We've had some reaction from the Chinese government to this. This is what they had to say.
The United States, the world's #1 superpower, is so afraid of a mobile phone application that young people like so much that they completely lack any self-confidence. We firmly oppose the US's wrong approach of overstretching the concept of national security, abusing national power, and unreasonably suppressing the companies of other countries.
So that's a response from China. Our Asia-Pacific editor Celia Hatton is following the story for us. Celia, why has this move been taken by the US now?
Well, the United States has been discussing concerns about TikTok for quite some time, but there are many people in the United States who think that actually TikTok is just a target at the moment because it's one of the few things that both parties in the United States can agree on. Both Republicans and Democrats are concerned about the security risks posed by TikTok. Of course, this is front and center on the political agenda in Washington at the moment after that Chinese spy balloon episode. And so many people are discussing the threat posed by China, and now TikTok seems to be next on the agenda.
So what are the security risks as they are perceived by the American administration?
Well, it's not just the American administration. Many countries are concerned about the amount of data that TikTok collects. And it's able to collect information even from people who don't use TikTok. That's because many websites allow TikTok to sort of get information through a back door on their users. So there are concerns about the amount of information. There are concerns that TikTok has in the past admitted to accessing personal information. That happened in 2022 when 4 TikTok employees, 2 in the United States, 2 in China, were actually let go from the company after it was revealed that they had accessed personal information, including the information of 2 journalists who they were concerned were leaking or receiving leaked information from the company. So that's another concern. Also, there's the threat of disinformation. What exactly is being spread by TikTok? What is being allowed, not allowed? What is being promoted? So those are all the concerns that are spreading, not just in the United States, but elsewhere.
One could say these concerns would spread to other social media apps, but the difference is that TikTok is owned in China.
That's right. So there are special concerns surrounding TikTok. That's because TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is a Chinese tech company. Now, ByteDance, like all Chinese tech companies, has some legal obligations to the Chinese government. So in 2017, a national intelligence law stated that tech companies had to hand over data that was deemed to be important to national security. We don't quite know what that data is. ByteDance has denied sharing information with Beijing, but legally it's required to do so. Now, I should say that TikTok and ByteDance have gone to great lengths to try to reassure particularly US users. So they've even set up a media center in the United States. They allow researchers access to go in to view their algorithms, all in an effort to show that they are using data responsibly. They've also transferred their US users' data to servers in the United States that are not owned by the company. They're run by Oracle. And so this is all an effort to reassure, particularly American users. I'm not quite sure how successful that's going to be, but that's the company's strategy so far.
Celia Hatton, thank you very much indeed. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is attempting to build support for his new agreement with the EU on post-Brexit trading arrangements on a visit to Northern Ireland. The agreement, known as the Windsor Framework, removes most checks on goods destined only for Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK and gives ministers their powers to fend off some changes to EU regulations. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page reports.
The Brexit journey has lasted for 7 years. Borders have moved to the centre, dominating politics here.
Did everyone hear that? It's about people having to...
But the Prime Minister thinks he's finally found a solution. At a factory in County Antrim, he told people a devolved government would have a unique economic advantage, with local businesses having full access to the British and EU markets.
And that is the prize. I can tell you, when I go around the world and talk to businesses, they know that. They're like, that's interesting. If you guys get this sorted, then we want to invest in Northern Ireland, because nowhere else does that exist. That's like the world's most exciting economic zone.
The Windsor Framework means goods moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland only will go into a green lane. There'll be no routine physical inspections. There'll be a red lane for products due to move on into the Republic of Ireland. Those goods will be checked. There's also a measure known as the Stormont Break, which would enable the Northern Ireland Assembly to raise objections to EU rules. Whether the Assembly will be restored will depend on the DUP's eventual verdict.
Progress has been made. We continue to have some concerns. We will examine the legal text. We'll look at all of this in the round and come to a decision. We're reasonable people, but we want to ensure that what the Prime Minister has said is matched by what is actually in the agreement itself.
But there were also more sceptical remarks from the party, particularly over how much EU law would still apply in Northern Ireland.
You don't defend the Union by acting in a way which takes you out of the United Kingdom because you implement foreign law, which drives you further and further away from the country you belong to. Okay. So, I mean, the first thing to fix is the requirement of unionists to have to implement laws which are designed for their destruction.
Aside from the politics, there are the practicalities. It's at businesses like this where the Brexit rubber hits the road. The haulage company based here in Larne believes the new agreement will drastically reduce costs and paperwork. It says more work's needed to maximise the benefits.
We also have to focus on those suppliers in GB as well and let them know how easy it hopefully will be to move goods over here, and to say we're open for business and we want you to send your freight, your goods to us. We're ready.
Rishi Sunak has sealed his deal with the EU, but there remain hard miles ahead. The way forward for Northern Ireland isn't completely clear yet. Chris Page, BBC News, Larne.
The governor of the Moscow region says a drone came down near the town of Kolomna, southeast of the Russian capital. Meanwhile, at least 4 people are reported to have been killed in the latest Russian shelling in the Kherson region in the south of Ukraine. Local authorities say the Russian army attacked civilian targets, including a school. Moscow also intensified its attacks on the east of the country. The town of Sviatohorsk and also Bakhmut city came under attack. A nursery in the town of Kupiansk was hit as well. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is warning the situation on the eastern front line is becoming more and more difficult. Let's cross now over to the BBC Ukraine reporter Victoria Sunan in Kiev. So now we know really the focus of the Russian spring offensive, and that is in the east of the country.
Hi, indeed, we are hearing the reports about intensifying battles in the Donbas region, and yet they continue along all of the almost 800 kilometers front line. Among those things that you've mentioned, we hear that the most fierce battles are taking place around the town of Bakhmut, and that town has been in the worldwide news for many months because both Russia and Ukraine are fighting very fiercely for this town. But now there are real fears that Ukrainian army may be getting into Russian encirclement there, even though Ukrainian authorities do not confirm any claims of Russian successes.
And no doubt Ukraine is hoping that the tanks that have been promised will arrive swiftly in order to help it hold that front line.
Look, there has been lots of communication coming from the authorities in the most recent weeks about how much Ukraine needs weapons and what exactly types of weapons Ukraine needs. So, of course, we've heard a huge campaign about tanks, and the appearance of the first Leopard on Ukrainian soil was literally celebrated. And then the next step is the Ukrainian authorities, including President Zelensky, keep reiterating that fighter jets F-16 are what Ukraine needs to get back its territorial integrity and to achieve peace.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. 3 Nigerian opposition parties have called for Saturday's general election to be cancelled, describing it as a sham. They said results had been manipulated, leaving the poll compromised. Bola Tinubu from Nigeria's governing APC is currently in the lead. Many states have yet to declare official results. With 14 out of 36 states declared, the main opposition candidate, Atiku Abubakar, is in second place, while Labour's Peter Obi has caused a major upset by unseating Mr Tinubu in his stronghold of Lagos. There have been technical problems with the new electronic voting system, and international observers have noted a lack of transparency. Joining me now from Abuja is Peter Ogwoche. Peter, how serious are these accusations of irregularities in the voting, counting of the votes?
Well, those 3 opposition parties, Tanya, that have called for these elections to be cancelled and for there to be a rerun, they think their allegations are pretty serious. I mean, they mention things like vote rigging, vote buying. There's a new technology where the Electoral Commission is meant to upload the votes at the polling unit onto a portal where people can then verify the results of the voting against what is being announced at the national level. That portal is simply not working. I spent over 6 hours yesterday trying to get on it, and it's not working. So they say that whatever is being announced not be verified against what was voted for on Saturday. So they held this extraordinary press conference today where they implored on President Muhammadu Buhari to actually intervene, say, stop the process where it is at the moment. But the counting is actually still going on. The candidate of the ruling party, Bola Ahmed, won another state. Benue State has been counted in favor of the APC. So 15 states to the candidate of the ruling party. And I'm sure that will even annoy the opposition parties even more.
So what happens now?
That's anybody's guess. We're not quite sure. We've had no response yet to this from the Electoral Commission. I mean, they're going on with the counting, as I mentioned earlier on. The ruling APC, they came out with their own counter press conference to say that what these three parties are asking for is illegal and should not happen. What happens next, we're not quite sure. I mean, these elections have cost Nigeria almost $700 million. And I doubt very much with the cost of living crisis going on in the country right now, whether they can actually afford to have another election.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Still to come on Global. After the wave of attacks in the West Bank, we'll ask the leader of the Israeli opposition party what more can be done by the government to stop the violence.
Introducing the new horizon for Riyadh. This is the new Maraba, the world's largest modern downtown, and at its heart, the Muqab, the world's first immersive experiential destination. Step inside and it's unlike anything you've ever seen, at a scale that's unprecedented. Experience a new horizon, new Maraba.
Welcome back to Global on BBC World News. China has condemned the US government's decision to order all its agencies to delete the social media app TikTok because of security concerns. Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is in Northern Ireland seeking support for his deal with the EU on trading arrangements post-Brexit. Well, now to the Middle East, where the Israeli military has tightened security in the occupied West Bank city of Jericho as retaliatory unrest intensifies. Here we can see Israeli guards looking for a Palestinian gunman who carried out several drive-by shootings on Monday, killing an Israeli-American motorist in his car. On Sunday, after two Israeli settlers were shot dead near Nablus, a large group of settlers carried out revenge attacks in nearby Palestinian villages. One Palestinian man was shot dead. These pictures show torched houses and shops in the town of Huwara near Nablus in the West Bank. The UN Security Council is set to meet behind closed doors later to discuss the recent wave of violence in the West Bank. The Israeli Minister for National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is the leader of the far-right Jewish Power Party and a member of the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government, said citizens should trust the Israeli authorities to protect them.
I understand the hard feelings, but this is not the way. We do not take the law into our own hands. The Israeli government, the State of Israel, the IDF, the security forces, they are the ones who should be crushing our enemies.
Well, let's now get the view of one of the main left-wing opposition groups, which is the Israeli Labour Party. Once a dominating force in Israeli politics, it's seen its influence fall as the religious right has risen. Let's speak now to the leader of the Israeli opposition Labour Party, then Merav Michaeli. Welcome to the programme. What would you do in response to this violence that we are seeing in the West Bank? What would your solution be?
Well, Labour, ever since Yitzhak Rabin, the late Prime Minister, who was assassinated exactly for this effort, believes and is pushing for a peaceful political solution in the West Bank for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That has been the case for 30 years now, over 30 years. But right now we are in a minority and we are in the opposition, and we are in an opposition to a far-right government, unfortunately, where Netanyahu allows very dangerous forces to threaten Israeli democracy and to threaten even the non-peaceful routine of the West Bank. And this is extremely, extremely dangerous. Of course, we have condemned dramatically and very, very strongly what has happened the other night. This is completely unbearable and unacceptable. We also do not accept the term to take the law into their hands. There is no law that allows anyone to go into a village and just burn innocent people's houses and to burn cars and animals. This is not something that should be made possible at all.
Right. You say, just to interrupt you there, you say that democracy is under threat here. Benjamin Netanyahu was voted into power. You were well aware what his agenda was. He's not new to the political scene. And yet you decided not to go into coalition with your fellow parties on the left. So was this not a choice, in a way, to allow Israel to go down this path?
First of all, this was not at all his agenda. This was nothing he ever dared to mention. Had he mentioned this in his campaign, this so-called reform, which is practically a coup that threatens to bring down the democracy of Israel, had he spoken of this in his campaign, he would never have gotten the majority that he has. We see this in polls now constantly. The people in Israel do not support this attack on the judicial system that he's bringing now. This is nothing that he was elected for. Actually, the people in Israel are expecting him to deal with issues such as
just to interrupt you again,
security.
What you're talking about is politicization of the judicial system. That's what you're referring to in this context.
Yes, and weakening politicization and weakening and actually creating a situation in which the government enjoys an exclusive power. That is what they're trying to pass now. This is what we're opposing very, very strongly. And actually, you can see on the streets in Israel for 8 weeks now, hundreds of thousands of people are taking to the streets and saying, no way. And we are seeing sectors in Israel who never took a stand on anything. Major officials, people who Netanyahu has appointed for many, many years in the past, people from security and, of course, from economy, the warns that we are getting from everywhere about how this will ruin Israeli economy as alongside the ruin of Israeli democracy are very, very strong and are very present. And we hear this from the American president and from the French president and from the UN and now from the German foreign minister.
Forgive me to interrupt you. You're talking about the protests against these judicial reforms or the politicization of the judicial system in a country where there isn't a constitution or an upper house, and that probably lies at the heart of the problem. But what you're not talking about is the violence that goes on in the West Bank, which can be traced back to settlements in the West Bank, which are opposed by the international community, and yet for which there are popular support.
Well, as I mentioned, Labour supports and believes in and is doing everything in its power to promote a peaceful political solution. But we need to, recognize that it is also a problem for from the Palestinian side. It's not like there's attempts to reach an agreement on behalf of the Palestinians. So this is a very, very complicated situation that's been going on for a very long time. And we can discuss the details of the prospect of how will such an agreement look like, but that is something that needs to be done between the two parties and not unilaterally, but by one side.
There we must leave it. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Global.
Thank you so much, Tanya.
Now to the subject of food, and the world-famous Michelin food guide has announced that it's taking a star away from Guy Savoy's celebrated restaurant in Paris for the first time in more than 20 years. Stephanie Prentice reports.
He's been named the best chef in the world for dishes including oysters in a frozen pool and lobster with green curry juice. But from Monday, Guy Savoy's Parisian restaurant will be opening its doors without its 3-star status for the first time since 2002. Michelin said that for such an important decision to be made, the site was visited by global inspectors multiple times. However, it never makes the reason for a demotion public. The guide hasn't downgraded anyone since the COVID-19 pandemic due to staffing and food price challenges, but has said it now needs to return to its former standards to stay relevant. The move to downgrade restaurants is always a controversial one, especially since the suicide of Benoit Loiseau, a close friend of Guy Savoy, after his restaurant lost a star 20 years ago. Mr. Savoy was made aware of the loss ahead of the guide's publication, and he wasn't alone in getting the bad news. Another three-star restaurant in La Rochelle, Christopher Coutanceau's upmarket seafood site, also went from 3 stars down to 2. And another 20 French restaurants were downgraded from 2 stars to 1 in the latest guide. An undeniable hit for French cuisine on the world stage, but one that may at least trigger some delicieux new dishes as the restaurants try to bounce back for next year's inspectors. Stephanie Prentice, BBC News.
Do stay with us here on Global. In a few minutes' time, we'll have more on our top story. China has hit out at the United States in a controversy over the video sharing app TikTok. It's after the White House ordered government agencies to wipe TikTok off federal devices within 30 days. And the House Foreign Affairs Committee is due to vote on a bill to give President Biden new powers to ban the Chinese-linked social media app, which is used by more than 100 million Americans. This is BBC World News.
Hello there. Very stormy weather in the Western Mediterranean thanks to Storm Juliet. Well, that's been bringing some heavy snow into the high ground of Mallorca, particularly above 800 metres elevation, but some of the snow's come down to lower elevations at times. Very strong winds for Mallorca as well. Gusts about 100 kilometres an hour through Tuesday. Still windy into Wednesday with gusts about 70 kilometres an hour. Heavy rain swirling around this feature, probably some of the heaviest rain working into the eastern side of Corsica during Wednesday, but the rain will also be extensive as it works into parts of the Balkans and across northern Italy with some mountain snow here. Now heading into Spain and Portugal, we've still got cold air in place. There'll be some mountain snow across northwestern areas above 800 metres elevation there. Generally the weather across northern Europe is on the cold side at the moment, so with the winds coming down from a northerly direction. Now looking at the weather picture into Thursday, we've still got unsettled conditions in the Mediterranean, still some strong winds around with the heaviest rain probably working into Italy as we go through Thursday, rain starting to affect portions of Greece as well. Now taking a look at the outlook over the next few days, Madrid starting to turn a bit milder towards the end of the week and the weekend beyond. Rome, heavy thundery showers for the next few days, the weekend looking drier and sunnier. In Berlin, a fine couple of days, but it starts to turn more unsettled this weekend. Bye for now.
Now showing on BBC Real.
I'm afraid I can't make it because I'd be travelling there especially for you. A Dutch contributor recently responded to a meeting request. Blunt and very honest. A stark contrast to how we speak in the UK.
British people and Americans and others to some extent tend to sort of dance around the issues.
If you are vague or not direct, then people will say, well, come on, let's be honest so we can move on.
I was born in the Netherlands but grew up in the UK, so I've always noticed the two extremes. British politeness and Dutch directness. But how much truth is there to this stereotype?
The Dutch are known as being direct, which means that the style is that the messages are quite precise and clear. They say what they mean what they say, so yes is really yes and yet no is really no. Whereas in most other countries the communication style is indirect.
Watch more stories like this at bbc.com/real.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines, Europe, the Taliban, Ukraine. Symbolically, it's very important. Let's take this stage by stage. Here's the BBC's Stephen McDonald in Beijing. The West has stepped up sanctions against Russia. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. But in practical terms, what does that mean? Next, we have to step back and let's just remind ourselves this is all part of the same story.
Piece the story together with Ross Atkins. Outside Source on BBC World News.
Rescuers are using their bare hands, and you can see them throwing down blocks and trying to search desperately for survivors.
And every minute that goes by, every hour that passes, lessens our chances of finding survivors here.
We're right in the centre of the city of Iskenderun, and what you can see here are two trucks that have just turned up handing out aid supplies.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines for Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean?
Piece the story together with Ross Atkins. Outside Source on BBC World News.
This is BBC World News. I'm Tanya Beckett. On today's Global, China and America go head-to-head over TikTok. China condemns the US government's decision to order all its agencies to delete the social media app because of security concerns.
We firmly oppose the US's wrong approach of overstretching the concept of national security, abusing national power, and unreasonably suppressing the companies of other countries.
Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been in Northern Ireland seeking support for his deal with the EU on trading arrangements post-Brexit. And we'll bring you a special report from eastern Kenya, where tens of thousands of people are living in a camp after fleeing drought in Somalia. And Let There Be Light, the dazzling Northern Lights display that can be seen a little further south than usual. China has hit out at the United States in a controversy over the video sharing app TikTok. It's after the White House ordered government agencies to wipe TikTok off federal devices within 30 days. The move follows legislation passed by Congress in December, and since then, the European Commission and Canada have put similar bans in place. But the US could take things a step further. The House Foreign Affairs Committee is due to vote on a bill to give President Biden new powers to ban the Chinese-linked social media app, which is used by more than 100 million Americans. And we've had some reaction from the Chinese government to this, and this is what they had to say.
The United States, the world's #1 superpower, is so afraid of a mobile phone application that young people like so much that they completely lack any self-confidence. We firmly oppose the US's wrong approach of overstretching the concept of national security, abusing national power, and unreasonably suppressing the companies of other countries.
Well, I'm joined now by our China media analyst, Kerry Allen, and with me also in the studio is our security correspondent, Frank Gardner. Let's start with you, Kerry. What is the concern of the US administration regarding TikTok?
Well, as China sees it, they feel that they've been here before and they don't feel that there actually is a concern. They see Chinese technologies and technology companies as appearing in Western countries as a natural trend, as China's economy has been growing and as it's able to provide this technology to the West, to the UK, to lots of countries around the world. And China does feel that it's been here before, that with Huawei, for example, now a very well-known tech brand, mobile phones, people have Huawei products. And as they see it, there's very much a feeling that China, it's unfair that this is happening to China, that actually, earlier this month we heard the US saying that there were suspected spy balloons in the US, and they feel that none of this is true, that really it's just scare tactics that are really trying to discourage Chinese products from being able to advance in other countries.
Frank, scare tactics or a real concern?
I think we probably have to see this in a geopolitical context, because if this was an Italian app or an app invented by any other democratic country, I think we probably wouldn't be having the sort of row that we're seeing. But it comes on the back of, as Kerry just mentioned, the alleged spy balloon incidents over the United States, China talking about taking Taiwan by force, the suppression of democracy in Hong Kong, the buying up of assets, economic assets all over the world, the rounding up of hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs and putting them in internment camps, and all of these things which have really alarmed a lot of Western countries, that China is more than just a global competitor, but possibly even a long-term strategic threat because of its love of surveillance, the fact that it likes to harvest so much data. Now, the UK, where we're speaking to you from, of course, hasn't really come out publicly on this, but the nearest we've had to it is the head of GCHQ, that's the government communications headquarters, one of the 3 national spy agencies, has said that he's had conversations with his own children, warning them about TikTok and the dangers of privacy, because the app does harvest quite a large amount of data. TikTok supporters, and including themselves, would say, well, no more than any other social media. And I think some would say there's an element of hypocrisy here, because some Western and US companies do harvest data and sell it on to other people.
Kerry, it's difficult to imagine what sort of useful data TikTok might harvest. If anybody has teenage children, they might wonder what on earth use it might be to the Chinese government.
Well, I think one of the big concerns has been that TikTok, as we know it, is very different to what TikTok is known as domestically in China, which is Douyin. And there are separate servers here because within mainland China, there are media controls. So China has censorship. If there is content that's posted on Douyin, the domestic version of TikTok, say that's critical of the Communist Party, this is removed. And people's contact details are tied into the app. So they're very much aware within mainland China that if they post anything critical of the president, Xi Jinping, for example, there could be implications for them. There could be the police come round to their door, that they're held accountable over this, and because this is what the app looks like within the country, then also there's the question of this is the first time really that a major Chinese firm has appeared on the social media scene. For years we've been using platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube overseas, and these are all American companies. So obviously the way that things operate within mainland China, that obviously does create an element of fear or kind of questions about how the app operates overseas.
So Frank, clearly the US does not believe that the legal system would work in its favour.
Which legal system?
Well, either the US or China,
right. Really. TikTok's CEO did go to Capitol Hill quite recently and made a pitch to say, he met a number of congressmen and women, and made a pitch to say, look, you've got nothing to fear here. But it wasn't really very successful. And I think the critics of TikTok are probably in the supremacy in that case. I think you can break down the concerns into a number of areas. There is the harvesting of data. Well, all social media companies do that to some extent. The critics of TikTok say, well, it doesn't just harvest data, it harvests exactly where you are, your location. It can spot if you've been close to somebody else. They're not the only social media platform to do that. There is the concern that undue influence could ultimately be used by the Chinese government exercising its right over ByteDance. Now, ByteDance say they don't interfere, but people in the West don't necessarily believe that because there is a security law in China, which means that by law, companies, if asked or ordered to, will have to hand over data, regardless of what the company says or wants. And finally, there is the fact that federal employees could possibly have sensitive data and sensitive apps on their phones, which could possibly be eventually transferred to servers inside the People's Republic of China, which is why they've given this 30-day limit, this ultimatum for all agencies. State Department, Defense and Homeland Security in the States have already removed it. So they're just basically dotting the I's and crossing the T's to make sure that it's off all federal employees' appliances.
Thank you very much indeed, Frank Gardner. The drought in East Africa is expected to stretch into its 6th failed rainy season. Kenya, Somalia and Ethiopia are the worst affected as climate change makes dry spells worse. Now thousands of Somali people are fleeing their country as they seek safety and help in neighbouring Kenya. Our Africa correspondent Catherine Borianga has been to a camp where more than 100,000 people have arrived in less than a year.
Thousands of homes that have sprung up in a matter of months. War used to be the main reason people fled Somalia. Now climate change is a strong competitor.
The camps here are literally bursting at the seams. Thousands of new arrivals are settling on their outskirts. And because these are informal settlements, aid agencies say they can't provide the help that they need. So proper accommodation and healthcare. The people here are living in limbo, unable to get the support they need.
They don't have much, but people here help one another. The Aiden family arrived 2 nights ago and were taken in by strangers.
It's much worse compared to previous droughts. No water, the dams are dry. A lot of people have died, let alone animals, due to drought and hunger.
At 98 years old, Gelo Abdi has experienced a lot of Somalia's recent history, independence and decades of war. But this is the first time she has fled her home. Drought brought unbearable hunger.
I have lost 50 people from my family. Others were shot while others died of hunger. We have ran away from hunger and war.
But the presence of Somali refugees in Kenya is contentious. The government has tried to push them out, accusing these camps of harbouring Islamist fighters, something that has never been proven. It means even though old camps are being reopened, aid agencies can't bring anyone here or offer them the help they need.
The facility is there, but the government is just telling us that refugees cannot be relocated to the site until they are registered. But the government has to give the go-ahead for registration to resume because it was there was a ban on registration after 2016.
Kenya's government promises to start registrations soon. But the people here need help now, and many more will surely follow as climate and conflict form a deadly alliance against them. Catherine Byaruhanga, BBC News, Dadaab, Kenya.
Let's now return to the White House ban on TikTok and get more from our business presenter, Ben Thompson.
Tanya, thanks very much. Yeah, clearly lots of business implications for this too. As Tanya's been telling you, the White House has ordered government agencies to wipe the Chinese social media app TikTok off federal devices. It's given staff 30 days to do so. Well, it follows a similar decision by the Canadian government on Monday, and last week the European Commission also banned TikTok from staff phones for what it said were cybersecurity reasons. So is there anything really to worry about? Earlier, I asked a cybersecurity expert whether it was a sensible precaution by these countries or simply an overreaction.
Most definitely, I think it is a prudent response because we know that these big platforms, these social media platforms, do harvest data. And back in November, TikTok did admit that they actually do harvest data for their own analytics. So doing it on work devices, particularly government, it makes sense that actually we shouldn't be using these sort of social media apps on work devices. The 3 biggest cyber risks that we see are against people, data and communications. And 75% of all attacks we see are through the oversharing on social media. Now, TikTok is a social media platform, as there are many others. Because these big platforms attract big audiences and people click on these links and interact with the various applications, that allows persistent threat actors, and it can be any spectrum of the threat actors, that will actually look at this data, see what vulnerabilities there are in the users, and then target their campaigns. And to do it on work devices, this compromises the normal cybersecurity measures we may put in place because the person is actually clicking on the link and allowing that app to be used on a work device.
We'll follow that story pretty closely across BBC World News, but let's turn our attention to India's economy because it's continuing to bounce back from COVID. The latest growth figures show that Asia's third largest economy grew by 4.4% in the last 3 months of last year. Now, that is slightly below expectations. It's actually down from the 6.3% growth that was reported in the previous quarter. But there are still good sets of figures. So why is all of this important? Here's our India business correspondent, Nikhil Inanda.
The just released GDP numbers point to a growth trajectory that's looking fairly uneven. Yes, there's strength coming in from sectors such as agriculture, while construction activity has remained robust as well. But manufacturing is in the negative territory. For the year as a whole, India is expected to grow at 7% levels. But there are three major headwinds that the country faces going ahead. Number one is high inflation. And as a result of that, high interest rates, which have made financing very expensive and led to reduced consumer demand. Number two, a global slowdown, which has begun to hurt India's exports. And finally, a fading of the pandemic-induced base effect that had statistically distorted growth figures, which were looking very high in the last 2 years. All of this poses a major challenge to India's central bank, which has already raised interest rates by 250 basis points. If they do more hikes, they end up hurting growth. But if they pause, they risk runaway inflation, which is already above the Reserve Bank of India's comfort zone. Nikhil Anandar, BBC News, Mumbai.
So from India, let's head to Spain because farmers in the country are growing in anger, and that's in a protest at the loss of water that they say is needed for agriculture and to feed European neighbours. Well, the country is being hit harder by climate change than many others in Europe, and the government now faces tough decisions about which rivers to prioritise, as Guy Hedgecoe reports from Spain.
It's one of the great feats of engineering of modern Spain. A channel carrying water along 300 kilometres of canals, aqueducts and tunnels. It allows Spain's longest river, the Tagus, to feed the river Segura in the southeast of the country. The government is now implementing a plan to start reducing the flow along the man-made channel in order to increase the water level of the Tagus, which has been dropping in recent years.
Beyond complying with the laws, European and national laws, we are convinced that we need to anticipate the answers to the problems and challenges that we are already facing. There will be lower amounts of water available, so ecological reasons, but over that, the economic reasons and the social reasons are very powerful reasons.
But the plan will reduce substantially the amount of water flowing south along the Segura River. These farmers travelled to Madrid to protest against the initiative. I'm in the southeastern region of Murcia. Now, this area of the country is often referred to as the orchard of Europe, and that's because it produces around a quarter of all the fruit and 70% of all the vegetables that Spain exports abroad. And that's in great part thanks to the water that is diverted down here from the Tagus River. Farmers here say that up to 100,000 jobs depend on the current water supply. The new plan, they warn, will hurt both the Spanish economy and the European food market. When the water stops coming from the Tagus, this local farmer says, this area will turn into a desert, and that will have an impact on the food supply of the European Union. The government is promoting the use of desalinated seawater as an alternative. But farmers say it's too expensive. Central and southern Spain only see around 40 days of rain per year, a number which is dropping due to climate change.
The problem is that in the future we will have less and less water. We need to solve this in order to satisfy environmental needs while providing the right amount of water for farming and other activities.
The challenges presented by water have sown division in Spain. But what everyone can agree on is that this is an extremely precious resource. Guy Hedgecoe, BBC News, Spain.
Those are your global business headlines this hour. Tanya, back to you.
Ben, thanks very much. Still to come on Global. The Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights, put on a magnificent show in the skies over the UK and parts of Europe.
Now from BBC Real.
El terremoto más grande documentado y registrado en la historia es el que uno dice de Valdivia.
Estamos hablando del terremoto del 60, que se habla como el terremoto de Valdivia, pero en realidad Chiloé fue uno de los lugares más afectados.
Llamaba la atención la gritadera de los pájaros. Gritaban mucho los pájaros. Y el bramido de los animales vacunos, que corrían.
En el caso de las iglesias, ¿cierto? El terremoto no las afecta, porque esta estructura tipo mecano, construida además con un material flexible, que tiene sus problemáticas en lo orgánico, pero que tiene sus bondades desde el punto de vista estructural, porque su condición le da un grado de flexibilidad y que permite, ¿cierto?, que frente a los esfuerzos horizontales que son los sismos y los terremotos, ¿cierto?, estas estructuras se muevan, ¿cierto?, con una frecuencia de onda similares, ¿cierto?, a las del terremoto.
Original global stories from the BBC.
Welcome back to Global on BBC World News. New York City is pressuring the Biden administration to help it deal with an influx of migrants that has overwhelmed its homeless shelter system and led to the mayor declaring a state of emergency. Since last spring, more than 45,000 migrants have arrived, outnumbering the total number of people previously in the city's shelters. Nella Torfik reports.
The Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor has stood as an emblem of America's proud embrace of immigrants.
This view is similar to the one seen by many thousands of immigrants.
And New York in particular has long relied on those arriving with dreams of a better future. But the recent influx of migrants has created a state of emergency. In the last 10 months, more than 45,000 migrants have arrived, largely bussed here by conservative leaders from border states like Texas. But New York's mayor ultimately placed the blame on the federal government.
I'm not going to remain silent on that. This is wrong for the cities of America to take this on. The federal government should step in and say, let's coordinate this, and whatever city is available to take a portion, because if we all take a portion, it won't overwhelm a city.
So this is one of the units that's being prepared
Yes.
for the next family.
Yes.
By law, New York must provide shelter to anyone who needs it.
If you walk in here, is actually the unit that the family will be living in.
But the system is buckling under the strain.
There's lots of people who are coming into our system who are fleeing climate-related disasters. They're fleeing economic and political violence, social violence. Our system wasn't set up to deal with this population. So when people come into shelter in New York City, they come in, they usually have some belongings, maybe in a bag or something, and then we hook them up to a host of services, and these folks that are coming in aren't connected to any of that.
M.E. is an asylum seeker who's been in this shelter since July and wants to remain anonymous. She says she fled Venezuela at 4 months pregnant in search of a better life for her children, even though she knew the journey would be dangerous.
Sometimes we didn't have access to any food. My older child and I spent a day without eating. We would beg for food, but people had barely enough for themselves. We went through Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. We crossed through jungles. It was horrible, horrible.
Emmy hopes one day she can work and bring over her remaining daughter in Venezuela. Others like her are just as motivated to come to the United States. Still, the federal government is no closer to overhauling the immigration system. leaving the burden on cities. Neda Tawfiq, BBC News, New York.
The Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights as they're more commonly known, have been putting on quite a magnificent show in the skies over the UK and parts of Europe over the last few days. Wendy Urquhart reports.
It's a phenomenon that never fails to impress, and some people travel hundreds of miles just to see this wondrous sight. The drama usually unfolds slowly with flashes of neon colour here and there in the sky, but when they start dancing, they really are something else. The Northern Lights have been seen as far south as Oxfordshire in the UK, and some people were lucky enough to see shooting stars at the very same time. The Aurora Borealis is caused by solar storms on the surface of the sun, which send out electrically charged particles. Most of these particles are deflected away, but some collide with nitrogen and oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. And when those molecules recover from the collisions, they release small bursts of energy in the form of light, which is the spectacular light show that we know as the Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights. The colour of the lights depends on which gas is affected and how much energy is exchanged. The two primary gases in the Earth's atmosphere are nitrogen and oxygen. Nitrogen produces purple, blue or pink lights, and oxygen produces the neon green and yellow that we so often see. In the last few days, the Aurora Borealis has delighted hundreds of people who've uploaded photos and videos to social media platforms so that the rest of us can enjoy their beauty too. Wendy Urquhart, BBC News.
Quite a visual feast there here on BBC World News. This is Global. I'm Tanya Beckett.